What if you lost track of what the teacher was saying every time you looked down to take notes? What if you were too wiggly and rambunctious to be allowed to go to Sunday school, or too exhausted by social events to make friends? When listening is too hard, the brain tunes out. In the classroom, students struggling with auditory processing may start exhibiting distracting or challenging behaviors, which then, understandably, may get diagnosed as ADHD. If weak auditory processing is at the root of the attention loss, treating ADHD won't actually solve the problem. Welcome to the LD Expert Podcast, your place for answers and solutions for dyslexia, learning, and attention challenges. I'm your host, Jill Stowell, founder and executive director of Stowell Learning Centers and author of Take the Stone Out of the Shoe, a must-have guide to understanding, supporting, and correcting dyslexia, learning, and attention challenges. This summer, I joined study skills expert Jessyka Coulter for her Learn It virtual event to talk about auditory processing, what it is and what it's not, what it looks like in real life, why it matters so much more than most people realize, and what can be done to overcome those challenges. Because auditory processing challenges are so hard to see and understand, I'm going to play a short simulation during the episode so that you can actually experience what it feels like to live with an auditory processing disorder. This is a topic that I'm deeply passionate about because for over 40 years, I've seen how often children, teens, and even adults struggle with listening and friendships and attention. And it's not because they're not trying hard enough. It's because their brain is having to work overtime just to make sense of sound. When people hear the words auditory processing, they usually think it's about hearing, but it's not. So let's dive into my conversation with Jessyka Coulter from the Learn It virtual event, because auditory processing is something that is so prevalent in learning challenges and yet so invisible that it's often overlooked.
Well, hey, mamas, welcome to our event, Learn It. I'm Jessyka Coulter, CEO and founder of Ace Cookie Tutoring and your summit hostess. Our guest today is hopefully a familiar face. I've gotten to interview Jill just a couple times. She is the founder and the executive director of the Stowell Learning Center. So, Jill, thank you for joining us again.
Well, thank you for having me. I always enjoy our chats.
Yes, I love it. And every time I feel like we've talked about something different, and today is no exception. So I love how you have so many specialties when it comes to neurodiversity, when it comes to learning challenges. And today's topic, I feel like, is something I've heard about, but I didn't realize I didn't know it until you sent an email, and I was like, oh. So tell us what we need to know about auditory processing disorder. Like, what is it, and like, why does it happen? Like, I feel like we need to start at the very beginning.
So the auditory processing system in the brain is not your hearing, but it's how the brain perceives information that comes in through the ears. And when someone has difficulty processing auditory information, you can look at them and have no idea that it's difficult, but they may look like they're kind of lazy, or they don't care, or they're checked out, or you said to take notes and they're being defiant and they're not doing it, or they have an attention problem. Auditory processing issues get confused with attention deficit often because it's really hard to pay attention when the information that you're getting is confusing and not clear. So one of the things I like to compare it to is a bad cell phone connection. Everybody's experienced that, right? Well, there's nothing wrong with your ears, but you're having trouble getting the message. It's cutting in and out, or it's a little garbled. And so you're like, what? Wait, say that again. And then you maybe say the wrong thing. You get irritable, you lose your attention. And with a cell phone, we can just say, I'm going to call you back. But when this is your life, it's exhausting and overwhelming and frustrating. And I thought it would be helpful because it is so hard to see. I thought it would be helpful for our listeners to be able to experience what it might be like to have an auditory processing problem. So in just a second, I'm going to play something for you that is actually, it was written by Dr. Daniel Amen. He's an expert in ADHD and moods. And so it's really good information, especially for everybody, but especially for teenagers. And so I want you to listen to it carefully because there's great information for you. And listen to it as though you were going to need to tell someone, explain it to someone after. Okay?
Did you know every time you have a thought, your brain releases chemicals? That's how our brain works. You have a thought, your brain releases chemicals, and an electrical transmission goes across your brain, and you become aware of what you're thinking. Thoughts are real and they have a real impact on how you feel and how you behave. Every time you have a bad thought, an unkind thought, a sad thought, or a cranky thought, your brain releases negative chemicals that make your body feel bad. When you're upset, imagine that your brain releases levels of sad or angry faces, looking to cause problems. Think about the last time you were mad. What did you feel? What feelings did you have inside your body? When most kids are mad, their muscles get tense, their heart beats faster, their hands start to sweat, and they may even begin to feel dizzy. Your body reacts to every negative thought you have. Every time you have a good thought, a happy thought, a hopeful thought, or a kind thought, your brain releases chemicals that make your body feel good. Whenever you have a happy thought, imagine your brain releases bubbles of glad or smiling faces making you feel good. Think of the last time that you had a really happy thought, such as when you got a good grade on the test, or played with your pet. What feelings do you have inside your body? When most of the kids are happy, their muscles relax. Their heart beats slower, their hands become dry, and they breathe slower. Your body also reacts to your good thoughts.
So how do you feel now? Oh.
I'm going, okay, I'm glad I had the captions on, yes.
That was 90 seconds. So then if you imagine what that would be like if that was how you were processing language and sound all day long, how exhausting that would be.
Wow. And so do people really, I mean, you're talking about bad cell phone reception, Jill, and then we're talking the clip that we just listened to. I mean, it did sound really staticky. So, I mean, is that 100% how it works for people with APD? I mean, are they really hearing the kind of the crackling, kind of the static?
You know, I don't know about this. I think it is probably different for different people, but interestingly, we do auditory stimulation and training at our center, and I was doing a seminar, teaching a seminar on one of the sound therapy programs that we use. And I was teaching to learning center owners. They were all very successful, smart people. And one of the women in the group, when I played that clip, she burst into tears. She said, "That is my life." Yeah. So we had a student who we worked with when she was a junior in high school, and this girl had APD. She knew that she had it from the time she was 8. So she and her mom had really investigated. They knew what she needed. They understood it. And she was really an advocate. She had a Instagram channel where she went live to talk to teens and parents and teachers and say, hey, here's what it's like to have an auditory processing disorder. And she said that she knew that she had to sit in the front of the class because she had to be able to see the teacher. Otherwise, she wasn't going to get it. She knew that she couldn't listen and take notes at the same time, which in high school, you're expected to do that. But she said, if I put my attention on taking notes, I'm going to miss so much information that the notes don't make any sense at all. And so if she was going to have a hope of getting it, she had to just listen. But she had to listen so hard that she would get home from school and she was just exhausted. Now, this was a girl who had goals. She wanted to go to college. And so she was motivated, but she'd get home from school and it was like, I cannot sit down and do more work. I don't have anything left. And she even talked about socially, social is so important. Friends are so important for our teens. And she said she just would have to psych herself up to go somewhere like a football game or a group outing with friends or a party. One-on-one was fine, but with a group, she said it was just so overwhelming that she had to really get up for it and then couldn't really handle it for very long. So I thought that was really good insight into what it feels like, from a teen.
Definitely. And I'm kind of sorry to hear about this girl, but at the same time, I'm happy in the sense to know that there is a connection between this and the learning styles, because that was part of my question. Is I work with some teens that are very, very visual like I am, and they would rather not have to listen to anything and just get to read the book, see what's on the board. And then I also work with teens, like you just said, that listen to everything and they can't write. And we have to have the discussion of, what do you remember hearing, and is that enough, or do we need to write something down that almost triggers what you heard? So that connection.
Yeah.
So I was curious, if there was any APD that was more likely to happen, if someone was super visual, because okay, maybe that didn't work, but now that we know, okay, that's what it sounds like, that's very different than I'm just not paying attention.
Right. And I think that's a really important thing for parents and teachers to just know that yeah, it looks like attitude, but there might be more to it. There usually is. The auditory system is really important in ways that you wouldn't expect. Our brain can process this really wide range of sound frequencies, and the low frequencies in sound, those are kind of like, the bass in dance music and rhythm. I mean, they get you. They kind of help ground you. They want to help you move. They help regulate you. And so if your brain is not really processing those lower frequencies, you may have difficulty with regulation. And as soon as we start to get the brain to hear that and process it, the whole system settles down. And I remember a little boy, he wasn't a teen, he was like 5 or 6, but he was just, his body was just sort of out of control all the time. And we started working with sound therapy with him and focusing on those low frequencies. And almost immediately, it started to settle his system. Now it's a process, but that weekend, for the first time, he was able to go to Sunday school and was even allowed to stay because he could settle. I mean, so, and then the mid-range frequencies are really where the speech sounds are. And so what you listen to on that stimulation is kind of what it would be like if you're just not processing those frequencies well. You get part of it. I mean, I'm sure you got some of those words, but then you're trying to connect the dots all the time. What are they really saying? And then you miss some. And we had a student say, when I sit in class, that it's like the Charlie Brown teacher, wah, wah, wah. And you think, of course they're not paying attention. Of course they're agitated because they can't get good information. And then the high frequencies, which we're not even really aware of, those are called overtones, but those are the frequencies that energize us. And so if we're not processing that, we're going to be kind of down, we're not going to be able to get going and have no energy in our voice. And when you stimulate the brain and it can process those high frequencies, now you're seeing an increase in confidence and wanting to do things. And so it's quite fascinating. At one of my seminars, I had a parent say to me, she was a therapist, but she said, "Oh my gosh, this sounds like something my son needs." And it turned out that her son had just started college. And he had always been kind of depressed and down, and he didn't have friends, and he was smart, but he wasn't good at school. He was very talented musically and in sports, but he just would never follow through with anything. So he'd start and quit. And in fact, while mom was in the seminar, he quit college.
Oh.
So we started doing sound therapy with him. And within the first week, he said, "Wow, I feel really good." He said, "I always feel up and down, but usually mostly down. And now I feel mostly up." And then 3 weeks later, he said, "Some friends that I met at school called me to see if I wanted to go out with them. And I went. And they talked to me like they really liked me, like I was a leader." I ran into his mom at another seminar a couple of years later, and she said, "He has said it made such a difference for him that he is a listener for life." So for him, it was those high frequencies that his brain just wasn't getting, and he needed that to be able to feel motivated and do things. So it's an amazing system.
Oh, goodness, that makes me, I want to ask so many questions still. So I guess if I have to pick and choose, immediately I'm thinking we're talking sound therapy. So that sounds like that's the answer to APD. That's kind of the strategy parents, teens need to be aware of if that's the diagnosis.
I think the thing that I want people to really understand is that it really can change. And unfortunately, that's not the message you're going to hear from even many audiologists. There are some that really specialize in APD. And so that would be a different message. But from, a lot of teachers and other educators, they just don't know. And so they think, okay, we know this is an issue. We're going to make accommodations. Great. But actually it can be changed. And what we do sound therapy, which is music that has classical music that has been specially recorded to highlight it, in a sense, like highlight these different frequencies in sound so that the brain is kind of like, oh, I hear that. I recognize that that's there now. So train the brain to be able to process those frequencies. And then we also do an active auditory training so that now that the brain can process it, we want to get all those frequencies into the voice so that the voice becomes the ongoing stimulus. See, my voice right now and your voice as we're talking, we're stimulating our own auditory system because we have a lot of high frequency and just, a rich frequencies in our voice. But if we're talking like this and we're just very monotone and very down, that is not serving our system. And so now that the brain can hear or process those frequencies, we want to get it into the voice. So, it's definitely not an overnight process, but I just want people to know it is possible. You do not have to go through life, struggling like that.
That's why I love talking to you, because no matter what we're talking about, there's always a solution. Because that's how I feel about study skills, is the fact of, okay, your teen is struggling. Well, that does not mean there's anything wrong with your teen. It means that there's something missing somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And we have to get to that root.
Yes.
Piece.
Yes. So I'm glad that I asked, because I was kind of curious. I was like, what all does sound therapy include? So I'm glad to know. So I guess the last thing before we really talk about your freebie, because I feel like, okay, we haven't talked about how we diagnose this, but I know that's part of your resource. So I think I'd rather ask you, you mentioned all these different frequencies. So, I mean, do people that don't technically have this processing disorder, I mean, do they also struggle? Because like I'm thinking, you mentioned the college kiddo, so did he have auditory processing, or was it just that one particular range? Is that part of the problem, but not necessarily auditory processing?
Auditory processing, like visual processing or any of these other areas, there are many, many, many facets to it. So it can look different for different people. So definitely that was an auditory issue for him. For some other people, it might be different. It might be that they can't pay attention in noise, or something like that. So it's going to vary. And, that's where you need to do some testing and do some exploration and see what's going on.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I want to go next, Jill, is how do we know that this is really what's going on? Like, how do we help our mamas know, okay, yeah, this is something that you need to know about your teen, or that your teen's really not making it up. He really is struggling.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what's the difference between the real problem and your teen just doesn't like school? Because that's a whole different problem.
Right. And honestly, usually when your teen doesn't like school, there's a reason for that.
Yes.
And auditory issues could be the reason. It could be other reasons, but so we have to explore and figure it out. Unfortunately, there's not like really a lot of places to get auditory testing. The schools will, if your child is in a special education or is being tested at school, they will generally test auditory processing. They just don't realize that there is something that can be done about it. Yeah. But schools will, psychologists sometimes, but really true auditory processing testing is more likely to come through like someone like us, a learning center, a speech therapist, or an audiologist who specializes in auditory processing, because not all of those professions do. So you have to look.
Okay. Awesome. And I know that your free resource is some kind of screener. So do you want to tell our mamas what that is and more about it?
Right. I put together a quick screening tool for auditory processing, just so that you can look at that. If you've been thinking, wow, this has been going on for a long time, they're always just a little behind in conversation. They start to listen and then they check out, or they're always, what? I think moms often have a sense that there's more going on. And this screener is just a quick, list of things that are really common that you can look at and say, I do think there's some auditory issues going on. It's honestly very common with learning challenges.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I'll make sure that link is down below, because I feel like that's something that's going to open a lot of eyes. That might be very new information to a lot of our listeners. All right. Well, I know that this is just one of many things that you can help our listeners with. So do you mind sharing your website, your socials, all those places our listeners can find you?
We are stowellcenter.com, like Stow, Stowell, stowellcenter.com is our website. And if you go to stowellcenter.com/newsletter, that is going to give you access to a lot of different free resources. But the one I want you to really pay attention to is that auditory processing screener. You can also get a free copy of my book, At Wit's End, which has 2 chapters completely devoted to auditory processing. So that might be helpful.
Well, I don't know if I need
and then we're out there on all the platforms, stowellcenter.com or
Goodness.
Stowell Center.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad I asked because I thought I'd read your book, but I'm going, how did I miss that? So I need to go back and relook. So thank you. All right. Well, Jill, this has been another awesome conversation. Thank you for your time.
I'm so grateful to be able to share this conversation with you today. I hope that you're walking away with a better understanding of auditory processing. If you want an even deeper dive, check out stowellcenter.com/APD. And remember, go to stowellcenter.com/newsletter to find all kinds of free resources, including the quick auditory processing screening checklist that I mentioned in my conversation with Jessyka. I have been fortunate to be a part of several of Jessyka Coulter's virtual events. Jessyka is a study skills coach and the founder of Ace Cookie Tutoring. You can find her at acecookie.tutoring.com, and she is Ace Cookie Tutoring on social media. You're going to want to keep an eye out for her next virtual events. At Stowell Learning Centers, we help children and adults break free from the constant struggles associated with dyslexia and other learning challenges, including auditory processing. Despite what you may have been told, your child doesn't have to just live with it. And every day doesn't have to feel like a battle for them or for you. If this episode gave you hope or insight, please like, subscribe, or send it to another parent or educator who needs to know real change is possible.